From historic apartment complexes shrouded in mystery and reportedly infested by all manner of spirit, to creepy and classic cemeteries where it's said the dead roam after dark. Are you ready for the most haunted places in Houston, Texas? Number 5. Glenwood Cemetery. Glenwood Cemetery, also known as the River Oaks of the Dead, is a historic burying ground located off Washington Avenue overlooking Buffalo Bayou in Houston that is recognized as one of the city's most significant landmarks, having been the first yard to be professionally designed. The yard was originally established as a private cemetery circa 1871 by the Houston Cemetery Company. Grounds now holding the graveyard were landscaped extensively to fit a garden cemetery and hosted their first burial in 1872. Glenwood would go on to serve not just as a burial ground, but also as a popular community park. The office cottage was constructed in 1888, accompanied by the installation of irrigation systems and fountains. The greenhouse would come later on with the addition of housing for the superintendent. In 1900, the gate and iron fencing around the yard were erected, and in 1903, the cemetery was transferred to the newly established Glenwood Cemetery Association, which managed operations until 1969, after which Glenwood Cemetery Incorporated, a non-profit, was formed to take the reins. In 1999, Glenwood acquired the adjacent Washington Cemetery, which was established in 1887, expanding its grounds by a whopping 13.5 acres. The very same year, the Glenwood Cemetery Historic Preservation Foundation was formed to oversee historic preservation of the yard. Today, Glenwood covers around 84 acres, 18 of which are still under development and open to burials, and holds a number of prominent names and influential figures from the history of both Houston and Texas. Chillingly, a number of bodies were moved to Glenwood from other graveyards, and many suspect this displacement led to the cemetery's very active hauntings, with those stepping on its grounds reporting orbs captured in photographs, disembodied voices, and the feeling of being constantly watched or followed by something unseen. Both accurate history and a bit of legend combined to tell the caretaker of the adjacent Washington Cemetery was murdered in 1977, the case actually remaining unsolved to this day. His spirit has been sighted wandering the grounds, tending graves at night, vanishing if he's approached or addressed. A series of informal investigations at Glenwood over the years have yielded high EMF levels, chilling EVPs, and extreme hot and cold spots experienced when the weather is at an opposite. Shadowy figures are sighted after dark, slinking about, and a number of full-bodied apparitions, clad in garb spanning the centuries, have been encountered. The most supernaturally active grave at Glenwood is said to belong to Araminta Wettermark, a mother whose children both passed away in Sweden in 1868. Her spirit has been sighted wandering the graveyard, calling out, some say forever searching for her lost children. Number 4. The Niels and Melly Esperson Buildings. The Niels and Melly Esperson buildings are a multi-tenant complex located off Travis Street in downtown Houston that structures, which are both styled for the Italian Renaissance, hold the titles of being two of the most recognizable in the entirety of the downtown area. In 1893, Niels and Melly Esperson were married, and just a decade later, in 1903, would move to the Houston area. The couple would quickly become wealthy through both oil and real estate. When Niels passed away in 1922, it was up to Melly to continue their business ventures. In 1924, Melly began planning an office building in honor of her late husband. The 32-story Niels Esperson building was completed and opened to the public in 1927, and boasted the title of being the tallest structure in Texas at the time. In 1941, a 19-story building was erected separately, but still adjoining on most floors, to the Niels Esperson building, and was named in honor of Melly. It was noted for being the largest office building to be constructed in Houston through the Great Depression. In 2012, Cameron Management, which was founded in 1995 and is known for owning classic locations while managing and leasing office buildings, purchased the Esperson buildings outright. The Niels and Melly Esperson buildings remain notable Houston landmarks to this day and provide space for offices, banks, oil companies, real estate operations, and much more. Through their existence and up into recent times, the married buildings have picked up quite the reputation for paranormal activity, with staff and visitors from within often reporting strange electronic malfunctions, abnormally fast battery death, and the elevators acting as if they have a mind of their own. A number of reports detailed disembodied footsteps from empty rooms or spaces, doors opening and closing on their own, and secured cabinets found ajar, sometimes within rooms that are also locked. Shadowy figures have been spied slinking about, strange noises are heard emanating from within the walls, and orbs have been sighted zipping around, visible to the naked eye. The most famous ghost said to roam the property might just belong to Melly Esperson herself, who passed on in 1945. Shortly after her passing, many who knew her in life began describing sighting her apparition throughout both buildings, always seemingly hurrying out of sight. Her ghost has been encountered countless times since, up into the present, and many report feeling her energy during especially stressful renovation or work periods. Lastly, reported all across the property are objects sighted moving on their own, sudden drops in temperature, and the constant feeling of being closely followed. Number 3. The Elder Street Artist Lofts. The Elder Street Artist Lofts is an apartment complex located off Elder Street in Houston's historic First Ward that's housed in the remnants of a historic hospital building, the first centralized municipal hospital, in fact, to treat indigent patients across the city. Deservedly, the building holds its spot on the National Register of Historic Places. Chillingly, starting through the 1840s, land now holding the lofts was initially utilized as a municipal cemetery. It became the final resting place for countless individuals, including over 6,000 Confederate soldiers, formerly enslaved, and city officials. Houston would officially halt its use of the area as a burying grounds in 1879. However, the field would continue to see family-related internments through the 1890s. By the early 1900s, the cemetery had fallen into a state of disrepair, and finally, in 1924, it was decided the land would be used to hold Jefferson Davis Hospital, which was complete by the year's end. While some bodies were relocated, most were left in place, with the building's basement being constructed above ground in order to prevent altering any grave sites. The hospital grew in popularity, but by 1938 couldn't sustain the city's medical demands. Services were transferred to a larger facility, with the hospital closing down the following year. Preceding the hospital's closure, the building went on to serve a number of purposes before getting abandoned entirely in 1988. The building remained empty until 2005, when it was renovated into the Elder Street Artist Lofts in an effort to provide living and working space for local talent. The lofts, not really surprising to anyone, are said to be haunted by the spirits of the many bodies buried at the old cemetery, by the restless souls of remains that were displaced, as well as, more recently, by the ghosts of those lost in, and presumably buried by, the hospital. And many have reported a wide range of full-bodied apparitions, clad in clothing spanning the ages, wandering the grounds, even interacting with the living. Reported all throughout Elder Street are strange noises from within the walls, accounts of alarms sounding for no reason, footsteps from empty rooms, disembodied voices, and the sound of someone sobbing, always heard from just out of sight. The Black Earth graves right near the hospital are theorized to have been the burial site for an English colony circa the 1600s, one who fell victim to plague or some other disease, and many have reported feeling suddenly ill, anxious, often forcing them to turn back. Those entering the lofts describe the phantom smells of sterilization products, rotting flesh, cauterizations, and the iron of blood. Also reported across the property are the apparitions of doctors, nurses, and patients, Confederate soldiers, shadowy figures, and the constant feeling of being watched. Lastly, many recount instances in which pets, even the most docile, have reacted badly when entering the building, sometimes with hostility. Number 2. The Rice Apartments. The Rice Complex, located off Texas Avenue in Houston, is a series of apartments housed within a historic hotel, a building that boasts its mantle as being one of the most iconic structures in the city, and that's undergone numerous changes, reconstructions, and modernizations throughout its impressive lifespan. The first building was constructed on site in 1836 and would serve as capital to the Republic of Texas from 1837 to 1839. In 1841, one Mr. M. Norwood leased the building, reopening it as the Capitol Hotel briefly. From 1842 to 1845, the building would serve as the Capitol once more, before being moved to Austin, after which business would resume as the Capitol Hotel. This first building was demolished in 1881, a new one constructed in its stead. In 1886, the property was purchased by William Marsh Rice, who set to work on an annex for the main structure. Sadly, in 1900, Rice was murdered, and the hotel was later transferred to the Rice Institute, who renamed it as the Rice Hotel. Over the years, business steadily declined until the Rice Institute was eventually forced to lease the hotel to one Jesse H. Jones, who demolished it in 1912. His new 17-story C-shaped hotel opened its doors on site just a year later in 1913. Through his ownership, Jones continued to make improvements and additions to the building, including a new wing in 1925, which would turn the building's C-shape into a sharp E. The hotel would continue to operate until 1977, when the new fire codes would require it be closed due to freshly deemed unsafe conditions. It sat unused for a time until, through the 1990s, restoration projects were launched, resulting in its 1998 reopening as the post-Rice Lofts. In 2014, the building was sold to Crow Holdings Capital Partners of Dallas, who launched a whole new round of renovations, renaming it simply the Rice. The Rice apartments have picked up notoriety for a number of local ghost stories, with residents reporting extreme cold spots, floating lights visible to the naked eye, and odd electrical malfunctions with no explanation. On November 21st of 1963, former U.S. President John F. Kennedy stopped at the Rice Hotel before traveling to Fort Worth, and then on to Dallas, where he was assassinated on the 22nd. Several have reported seeing his apparition throughout the building, and those who've stayed in his former room are often awakened in the middle of the night by the feeling of his presence with them. Reported across the property are strange sounds from within the walls, disembodied footsteps, voices, and instances of objects or doors moving when no one is near them. In the old ballroom, a number of tales of ghostly couples in old-fashioned clothing, dancing to old-timey melodies arose through the years, until that portion of the building was renovated, forcing the ghostly parties, strangely, to the rooftop, where they can be encountered to this day. Also reported across the premises are phones ringing with no one on the other end, bangs and voices from empty rooms, orbs and mists that show up later in photographs, and the feeling of being watched, followed, and even touched by someone or something unseen. Lastly, tragically, in 1858, Anson Jones, the last president of the Republic of Texas, committed suicide within the hotel. His apparition has been sighted roaming about, a grim expression on his pale face. Number 1. The Julia Ideson Building. The Julia Ideson Building is a Houston public library facility located off McKinney Street in downtown Houston that takes its name after Julia Bedford Ideson, the first head librarian of the Houston Public Libraries. In 1892, William Marsh Rice donated funds necessary for the construction of a new, free public library. The organization was officially established in 1895 and obtained its own building in 1904, being the Carnegie Library. When the library was opened, Julia Ideson was named as its first librarian, and in 1921 the library's moniker was changed to the Houston Public Library. Over the years, the organization's collection of books and other materials grew, as did its popularity, and eventually a larger facility was required. The building would open in 1926 as Houston Central Library, and would later take its current title, the Julia Ideson Building, in honor of the astounding woman's 40 years spent as head librarian of the branch. It would go on to act as the area's primary library until 1976, when the Jesse H. Jones Building opened, and a good portion of the Central Library's resources were transferred there. In 2009, large restoration projects were launched at the Julia Ideson Building in an effort to better complete its original design. Today, the building continues to act as a part of the Central Library System, holding archives and manuscripts, as well as the Texas and local history departments, and the Houston Metropolitan Research Center. The property is said to be haunted by a host of spirits, with staff and visitors commonly reporting objects sighted moving on their own, sheet music found scattered about, and entire bookshelves rearranged under impossibly short time frames. The most famous ghost reported to haunt the Julia Ideson Building is rumored to be that of one Jacob Frank Kramer, a former night watchman who worked the library for years. Jacob was known for his faithful service to the branch, as well as for playing his violin often on the third floor, in what is now the Tudor Gallery, in the evenings, before retiring to his basement apartment. It's recorded that one morning in 1936, staff arrived to find Jacob, at the time 79, had passed away in the night. His apparition has been sighted and heard throughout the building, following his routine from life, and has even been known to scare and chase off those with ill intent. To this day, many have reported hearing a violin serenade from the Tudor Gallery, seemingly emanating from thin air. Reported across the property are lights flicking from on to off by themselves, doors opening and closing on their own, and the sounds of someone moving through the building when it's closed and locked down. Legend furthers to tell that Jacob doesn't roam the property alone, and is joined by his trusty best friend from life, Petey, a large German shepherd that was always by his side, and that would follow him on his rounds. Many have recounted hearing the clickety-clack of old boots, accompanied by the scratching of dog nails, and the jingling of a collar, always from just out of sight. Lastly, a number of accounts tell of instances in which staff and visitors have reported feeling as if they're being followed, and then suddenly hearing panting or growling from the darkness, followed by the sensation of a dog brushing up against their leg. Most claim this phenomenon doesn't feel threatening, however, but more that Petey is just reminding them he's always watching out. Taking into consideration its fascinating and honestly inspiring history, and coupling it with a slew of ghost stories and urban legends fit for a scary movie, we felt there was no better choice than the Julia Ideson building as our pick for the most haunted place in Houston. Thank you all for tuning into our list of picks for the most haunted places in Houston. If you enjoyed hearing our histories and ghost stories as much as we enjoyed telling them to you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn notifications on so you know when fresh content is on the way. Throw us a like if you feel we've earned it, and most importantly, share this video and our channel with anyone you think deserves a good scare. We'll catch you all next time.